Thank you very much for supporting this. These are great events, and we really look forward to putting these on every Lent and Advent. So keep coming. My name is Damian Drozd. I'll be the MC this evening, and again, on the behalf of the Ignite Evangelization team, thank you all for coming and welcome. And we're almost there. Next week's Holy Week, so Lent's coming to a close, and we move into Holy Week and the joys of Easter. So definitely looking forward to that. I have the honor tonight of introducing our speaker. He's been I'll say an icon in the Diocese of Orange. He's been involved with the Diocese of Orange for a long time, and we're very honored to have him here tonight. I'll just kind of give a quick bio, and then we'll have him jump right in. Father Christopher Smith has served as the priest of the Diocese of Orange since 1978. He holds a master's degree in divinity from St. John's Seminary and a master's in religious education from Fordham University. He has served in several capacities in the Diocese of Orange, including parochial vicar, director of the Office for Religious Education, vicar for religious education, pastor of St. Joseph Church in Santa Ana, episcopal vicar for priests, and director of the Ministry of the Priest's Office. Father Smith was the first staff member at the Diocese of Orange assigned to Christ Cathedral. As Episcopal Vicar, he was designated by Bishop Fawn to oversee the administration, development, and carrying out of the mission of the Christ Cathedral campus. He was the first rector of Christ Cathedral and is now Rector Emeritus. Father Christopher has also served in numerous directorial and advisory boards, including the Board of Directors for St. John's Seminary, the Advisory Board of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, who I might add were my teachers growing up going to grade school at Our Lady of Guadalupe in La Habra. Those sisters were the primary educators at that school. The Advisory Board for the Vatican II Institute, the founding board of the Taller San Jose Hope Builders, and the Board of Concern America. He was the coordinator of mission education for Concern America and is chairperson of the editorial council of Orange County Catholic. He currently hosts a radio program, Cathedral Square, which is broadcast every Sunday from 11 a.m. to 12 noon on Relevant Radio, AM 1000. And there's podcasts of those shows available on the Orange County Catholic website. Father Christopher's talk this evening is entitled, The What and How of Hope, in the spirit of our Jubilee Year of Hope. So without any further introduction, please welcome Father Christopher Smith.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Damian. It's really wonderful to be here tonight with you. And I always think in an evening like this is a real gift from God, because we get just to spend a little while together, kind of away from our usual activities. And I like to think about tonight as this image. Years ago, a Protestant minister named Howard Thurman, he said this, he said, before you get into bed at night or out of bed in the morning, simmer. And I love that image of simmering because I like to eat, but I also like to cook. So I know what simmering means, and if you do cook, you know what that means. It means that you put all the ingredients in, and then there's usually water or some kind of liquid there. You turn up the heat, and then the recipe says when it comes to a boil, turn down the heat and let it simmer. And it's the simmering that helps all of the flavors come together. However, the flavors do not come together unless you turn down the heat. So I like to think of an evening like tonight as an opportunity for all of us to turn down the heat, if you will, of our lives a bit. And I'm always convinced that when we gather in the Lord's name, that the Lord will have something to say to each one of us somehow through this time together. So it's just wonderful to be able to be with you. And I would like to then begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving and gracious God, we thank you for gathering us together tonight. We thank you for this opportunity to simmer, to turn down the heat, to take a moment to reflect together on what you might have to say to us and how you might have us be, especially during these final days of Lent as we so look forward to celebrating the resurrection of your Son, Jesus, on Easter. We ask you, Lord, to open our hearts, open our minds, and let us be filled with new hope because we gathered in the name of your Son. And so we pray in the name of Jesus, who is Lord forever and ever. Amen. A reading from the book of Romans. You know that all creation is growing in labor pains, even until now. And not only that, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, we also groan within ourselves as we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we were saved. Now, hope that sees for itself is not hope. For who hopes for what one sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait with endurance. Jesus from John 14 says, I will not leave you orphans. I will come back to you. The advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all I have said to you. Peace I leave with you, my own peace I give you. In peace, a peace the world cannot give. This is my gift to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid. In a reading from an author by the name of Eduardo Galeano, the Uruguayan political prisoners may not talk without permission or whistle, smile, sing, walk fast, or greet other prisoners, nor may they make or receive drawings of pregnant women, couples, butterflies, stars, or birds. One Sunday, Didasco Perez, a school teacher, tortured and jailed for having ideological ideas, is visited by his daughter, Malay, age 5. She brings him a drawing of birds. Well, the guards destroy it at the entrance of the jail. Drawings of birds are not allowed. On the following Sunday, little Malay brings him a drawing of trees. Trees are not forbidden. And the drawing gets through. Didasco praises her work and asks her about the colored circles scattered in the treetops. Many small circles half hidden among the branches. He says, are they oranges? What fruit is it? The little girl puts her finger to her mouth. Shh, 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 shh. And she whispers in his ear, silly, don't you see their eyes? They're the eyes of the birds that I've smuggled in for you. When I was pastor of St. Joseph Church in Santa Ana, one afternoon about 3:30, I heard gunshots outside the rectory. Now, in those days, the early 90s, gunshots in the neighborhood were not uncommon, unfortunately, but they certainly were uncommon at 3:30 in the afternoon. And I remember a young man named Dominic who was helping out at the parish. He was thinking about going to the seminary. He came running into my office. He says, Father Christopher, you got to come out because Nelson has been shot. Well, Nelson was a young 17-year-old. His family lived across the alley from the rectory. And I said, Nelson was shot. So I went out there and I went across the street, and there laying in the gutter is Nelson, dying. He had been shot point blank, a drive-by shooting, probably by a gang that was a rival gang of one that he had been affiliated with but not really part of. And Nelson had been actually experiencing some rehabilitation. And so I went out and I said, Dominic, bring out the holy oils. So he went into the church, he brought out the holy oils. It was raining, I remember, and there's Nelson lying, dying in the gutter, this horrible gunshot wound. And I'm sitting there with Nelson, and all of a sudden I see this little boy about 9 years old ride by on his bicycle. That little boy's name was Louis, and Louis was Nelson's brother. And Louis rode his bike by, seeing his brother had been shot, but of course Louis didn't stop. He just kept right on going. So I took the oils and I anointed Nelson, and then he died. That day I knew that my life would never be the same. I knew that my life would never be the same because the questions of hope became critical for me. I remember clearly that that day was a day when I asked myself, from now on, would I ever hope again? We had been working with the gang kids in the neighborhood and all kinds of things, and I just was ready to throw it all in. My question that day is a question I'm pretty sure that most of us have had maybe once or maybe several times in our lives. Will I hope again? It's a crucial question, not only from a human point of view and the motivations that we have for living and how we live, but it is also a crucial question for people of faith because we are called to live our lives with hope. So what is it anyway? Well, there's lots of ways to define hope, to describe hope, but for now, let's say that hope has to do with the fundamental knowledge and feeling that there is a way out of difficulty. Hope has to do with the sense that, yes, things can work out, that we as human persons somehow can manage what's going on inside and outside of ourselves. Hope is that sense that there are solutions, that something different is possible. Hope is having a sense of the possible, a sense that what we really need, we can have. Hope has to do with three basic ideas that I think are rather simple. And those ideas are, what I hope for, I don't have or see. Like it says from that reading from the Romans, hope is not hope if its object is seen. Hope is usually difficult. And the third thing is, I can have it. Hope is possible. From a Christian point of view, the possibilities of something new and different are there because of the transforming power of Jesus, and that hope is based on the victory that Jesus won on the cross, which we're preparing to celebrate in these final days of Lent. That transformation from the destruction of sin, conquering physical death, conquering the death of sin through the resurrection. And I'd like to suggest tonight that if you have ever experienced difficulty in having hope, it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's not because you don't have enough faith either. It's because hope is often super difficult. And I'd also like to suggest tonight that there is a difference between faith and hope. Faith is for the right now. Faith is for the time in between what just happened and what is going to happen. It's for the time in between. Hope presses us to look to the future, and we can't see the future. And so it is often more difficult than faith. We are more secure with what we can see in the present, even if what we can see is unpleasant. Faith has to do with belief that we put into practice in the present circumstances of life. For example, a belief that God is with us, a belief that we are forgiven by God. Faith has to do with believing something that cannot be verified. If something could be verified, it would not be faith. And I've thought about it over the years, and we really get a lot of practice in believing in things that cannot be immediately verified. Almost every day, we believe things that we can't verify. A couple weeks ago, I got onto an airplane. And when I got onto the airplane, I believed that the pilot had a license to fly the plane. I didn't ask him to produce the license to prove it to me. I just believed that he knew what he was doing. When we go out to dinner in a restaurant, we just believe that the dishes have been washed. We believe that nobody put poison into the food. Even though we weren't in the restaurant watching them cook it, we just believe that that's it. And there's lots of stuff like that. Hope is more difficult because it presses us to see something more than the wilderness that we may be in at the moment. As the scripture says, when the Hebrew people were suffering terribly in exile in Jerusalem, the prophet said, hope, even though you have no reason, given what you see in the circumstances of your life. And that's why hope is so tough. When Nelson was shot that afternoon, believe me, I went into the wilderness. I went into the wilderness of fear and discouragement and cynicism and even the wilderness of defeat. In that wilderness, the hope question was so crucial because it was about letting God say to me, Christopher, hope again, even though you have no reason to, as you hold the lifeless body of this teenager in your arms. Christopher, hope. Hope is difficult because it is unreasonable. It's almost irrational because it is based on no absolute data about what the outcome will be. Its object is not seen, as Romans says. I think that lots of times when we think we're losing our faith, what is really happening is that we are having difficulty hoping. The wilderness feels bad enough. I say, let's not make it worse when we're in tough times by thinking we're losing our faith. Things are bad enough and now I'm losing my faith. When what's really happening is we're going through the very normal challenge of trying to have hope. Hope is tough. Our faith is there. Even though hope is sometimes unreasonable, on the other hand, I say it's the horizon for reason. It provides the foundation for the decisions that we make. In other words, if I didn't think what I was deciding about had a possibility of happening, why would I even make that choice in the first place? Today, for example, when my friend Deacon Victor picked me up at my house to bring me here tonight, I wouldn't have even asked Victor to bring me here tonight if I didn't think that we had some kind of possibility of making it here in the first place. In fact, I probably wouldn't have even gotten out of bed much this morning, just stayed relaxing around all day long if I didn't think that I had a chance of getting here tonight. I believed that it was possible, and so I got in the car. I wouldn't cook a meal if I didn't think it had some chance of turning out halfway decent. That's a lot of faith sometimes. Anyway, I wouldn't go fishing if I didn't think maybe I could catch a fish, and lots of times we don't, but nobody goes fishing thinking I'm sure I'm not going to catch anything. We have possibility in there. That's why we decide stuff. That little girl, Malay, she saw the possibility of smuggling the birds into the prison by making the drawing of those circles in the trees. If she didn't think she had a possibility of getting that drawing through, she wouldn't have done it in the first place. Now Jesus would not have made the choice to hand himself over for suffering and death on the cross if he didn't think his Father could really make some good come out of it. And look what happened. His Father made great good come out of it. But even with the resurrection of Jesus, some still say that the cross was folly, that it was foolish. The question of hope for us Christians is important because the extent to which we hope has to do with the extent which we believe that something is possible. That significantly influences the decisions that we make. For example, if I didn't think that reconciliation had a chance of happening, why would I try to reconcile? If I didn't think that peace was truly possible, why would I try to be an instrument of peace? If I didn't think that we could have a world of justice, why would I try to build one? If I didn't think that healing was truly possible, why would I try to help people in the process of healing? If I didn't think God could forgive me, why would I ask? But sometimes we don't believe it, and so we don't ask. This is what I'm talking about, that what we decide really is influenced by what we believe is possible. If I didn't think it was really possible for us to change our behaviors, to grow and to develop in the image of God, why would I have spent almost 47 years of my life trying to help people have this happen? And why would I go through a Lent every single year if I didn't think there was some possibility of changing in a good way? Now, hope is not pie in the sky. It's not Pollyanna, everything's okay and there's no problems. Hope is thinking that things like reconciliation and forgiveness and peace and justice, unity and healing and all that stuff is really possible because of the power of God and Jesus. I've said many times when I've been preaching, and I've said it to the people, I said I would not even bother opening my mouth today if I didn't think that what the Lord is calling us to do had some possibility of happening in the first place. I might as well just keep quiet and never say another word. Christian hope is a paradox. On one hand, it is unreasonable because it looks toward what we cannot see or know, and on the other hand, hope is the horizon for reason. It provides, as I've been saying, the foundation for making the decisions that we make. Christian hope challenges us to think about what we think is really possible. And so I invite you tonight, and maybe in these days ahead, just think about what you really think is possible. And let's not take for granted what we think is possible, because there might be some things that deep down inside we don't think they're possible, but we should probably be saying it anyway. What do we really think is possible? Maybe we don't take steps sometimes to reconcile or to build peace because we have trouble believing that they are possible in the first place. And I'm afraid that might be happening in our world today in many ways, that people have stopped believing these things are possible. And so our active efforts to make them happen get diminished. I think deep down inside of us, we all want to be hopeful, but the truth is there are obstacles to having hope. I'm going to talk about some of those in a minute, but just for the moment, I would like to ask us to take a moment of quiet and to think about what event or circumstance or situation has sent you into the wilderness in the past, like the wilderness I described with Nelson's shooting. Maybe some of you are in the wilderness right now. What happened? What's happening? I invite all of us to say, think about where God might be saying, like he said to me, Christopher, hope again, even though you might not have a lot of evidence that you should, given the particular circumstances of your life. Hope. And put your name there, Mary, hope. Even though you don't have evidence maybe that you should. Damien, hope, even though that you might not have evidence that you should. Victor, hope. This is God saying it, even though you might not have a lot of evidence that you should. Shauna, hope, even though you might not have a lot of evidence that you should. Where have we been in the wilderness? Where might we be now in some way? And where might we need to let God say our name and let God invite us to hope, even though there might not be a lot of evidence out there that we should. I said a minute ago that deep down inside of us, I think we all want to be hopeful. But the truth is that there are obstacles to having hope. One obstacle that's a big one, I think, are past disappointments. Feeling let down and then getting cynical. You know, I hoped once and didn't work out, so why should I do it again? I will never forget what I think is such a cynical statement that is often said by a well-known talk show host who said this, and says it fairly often. There is no power in hope. Hope is nothing more than postponed disappointment. There's no power in hope. Hope is no more than postponed disappointment. Talk about cynical. Christians that believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus say that there is great power in hope. That's why Pope Francis declared this the Jubilee Year of Hope, because there's great power in hope. Hope is a lot. It's not even about postponed disappointment. This is the opposite of what the Christian perspective on hope is. And at the same time, I think it reflects a real obstacle to hoping, and that is past disappointments. Related to this are the painful experiences of our lives, the tragedies, the hurts, the betrayals, the illnesses which send us out into the wilderness. I asked you to think for a moment just a minute ago, what has called you into the wilderness in the past? Where might you be in the wilderness now? Those times when there's not immediate evidence to suggest that we have reason to be hopeful. The next obstacle, no immediate evidence. A lot of times, there's no immediate evidence that we should have hope. Another obstacle to having hope is a big one too, but sometimes hard to see, and that is failing to see that we need to have hope in the first place. If we fail to see the need for hope, then we don't acknowledge, that's when we don't acknowledge or name that we're in any difficulty or pain. And I don't need to tell you that most of us are pretty good at trying to deny it or escape pain sometimes. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to do it, through drugs or alcohol, through food, through sleep, through TV watching, through the internet, through business activity, through money, trying to not name the pain or not admit that it's there. Our lives sometimes can be full of what somebody once called false satisfiers. False satisfiers are those things in our life where we put a lot of effort into them because we think they will actually satisfy us. I mean, some people it's having nice clothes or a great house or a car or a job. Sometimes we make people the object of our satisfaction. We make power or security. If I only had more power or security, if I only had this relationship, I'd be satisfied. Well, some of that stuff can satisfy us for a while, but sometimes we gauge our value as a person on those things too. For example, some folks place their value as a person on their job, and if I don't have this job, then I'm not worth much, or occupation. We put great value on our worth as a person, sometimes on our health, or on being young, or looking young. We have lots of ways of making what we're capable of, our capabilities of life, saying that our lives have value. Well, what happens when the looks go? What happens when the capabilities go? The fact is we do age and all of these things. And if our value as a person is so dependent on those things, what happens when they're not there? When we put our trust in false satisfiers, when we lose them, it can seem catastrophic. I remember a few years ago when I was trying to decide if and when I should retire from my responsibilities as rector of Christ Cathedral. It was difficult for me because my entire priesthood had been, I described myself mostly by what I did for most of my priesthood, what I did in this assignment, this ministry, and all that kind of stuff. The truth is, my worth as a human being, my worth as a priest, has never depended on what my responsibilities were in any part of my priesthood. In fact, my worth and your worth does not depend on anything. Our worth doesn't depend on anything. Why? Because our worth is built in. They like to use that term these days. Well, it's baked into whatever it is, okay? Well, guess what? Our worth is baked in to who we are. Because we are created in God's image and likeness. Therein is our worth. So no matter what our age is, our responsibilities, our capabilities, our health, or what we all hold as precious, really we are precious because we're God's daughters and sons. I remember after I retired, and for the first time, few times I came back to help with masses at the cathedral, and after mass some people would say to me, Father Christopher, what are you doing here? I thought you retired. Yes, I did retire, but I'm still alive. I did retire. Other people would say, well, now that you're retired, what do you do? As if life could not go on for me unless I was rector of Christ Cathedral. Well, here's what I say when somebody says, what do you do? I say this. I say, I be me and you be you. That's what I do. I be me and you be you, and there's no better way to live as a son or daughter of God. Mark Twain once said, the most important day in your life is the day that you were born. The second most important day is the day that you figured out why you were born. And as disciples of Jesus, we were born to be who we are. Precious people created in the image of God. Precious people empowered to love. That's who we are. The more we choose in our lives to name our pain and go through it, the more hopeful we become. We are more hopeful because when we face our pain, with the power of God in Jesus, we come out the other end better and usually stronger. And you all know what I'm talking about, because when you face pain in your life, with the power of God in Jesus, you come out the other side of it stronger and a better person. The result of being willing to name the pain or difficulty or challenge is that our hope grows because we see that we are making progress. We're making our way through it after all. We are moving beyond what we saw as our limit. I remember years ago when I went back to Fordham University, the bishop at the time, I was about 5 years ordained, and he said, "Christopher, I want you to go back to school." And I said, "Why, Bishop? Don't you think it took the first time?" Well, I didn't say that. You don't say that kind of stuff to the bishop. So I said, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" And get a degree in religious ed. And he says, "Go to the best school that they have in the United States." "Oh, I can't go to one in Europe?" No, I didn't say that. So I chose Fordham University in New York. I was there for 2 years. I lived in the Northeast Bronx. Loved it. So many things about that I loved. But I remember the last time that I took the express bus from Manhattan back to the Bronx. Every once in a while I'd take this bus down to the Manhattan, and I loved walking around Manhattan and the buildings and all the stuff there. And that night when I drove back, when I was sitting in the bus, I was sitting toward the back of the bus. I said, "You know, Christopher, you're going home in a couple of days, and you've really liked a lot of stuff about living here in New York. But you know what? There's an awful lot that you didn't like. There's so many things that were painful and hard about these last 2 years." And then I started thinking about what they were. And I started crying. And I started letting myself name and feel the pain that I had just been stuffing for 2 years, because I was afraid if I didn't stuff it, I wouldn't make my way through. And now my crying turned into weeping. And now my weeping turned into whatever they call it when you're that kind of thing, okay? And I was so embarrassed. I thought, I don't know what they're going to think about this weeping man in the back of the bus that's shaking the whole thing. But anyway, I tell you that story because that weeping was a sign of acknowledging my pain that I had stuffed. And when I finally did that, it freed me tremendously to savor all the stuff that was good about those years and to thank God for all the ways that God helped me make through the tough stuff. But that would never have happened unless I let myself name the difficulty and the pain that I'd been stuffing down there for the last couple years. I was liberated. I remember the time before my mom's death for months. I remember my mom had a real bad stroke and one time, and she lived actually for 7 years after that stroke, but mom was weak, and it was just looking like she was getting weaker. And I used to jog. Well, I used to run. Then the running turned into jogging. And then one time I tripped and I broke some toes in my foot, and I stopped jogging and I started wogging. That was kind of a walk jog. And now I walk. But anyway, in the days of jogging, I used to wear these earbud things. They didn't have as nice as they do now. But anyway, a little iPod thing, you could program your music. But I remember on purpose not listening to songs that I knew my mother liked. Because I knew if I listened to my mom's favorite songs, I would be sad. They would make me too sad, and so I just wouldn't listen to them. And I remember the last week of my mom's life when she was in the hospital. And I remember that one day when I was jogging, I said, "You know what? I'm gonna listen to some of that music that Mom loved." And I did. Oh God, remember the bus? Well, here I go again, but this time I'm jogging and crying and listening to the music and all that. And it was painful, but it was also wonderful, because now I could free myself and be free to experience my mom's coming death. And also, I remember even starting to think about what I would say in the homily that I would give at her funeral. But it's because I let myself feel the pain of the possibility of her dying, and I was free. In my life, I have learned how ultimately debilitating it is to ignore the pain, because it still has a grip even if I don't say it or I try to escape it. I've learned that sometimes in my life, I don't let the Lord do some of his best work with me because I think I have to have it all together. You know that thing that I've heard people do, never done it myself. You know, you clean up the yard a little bit before somebody comes to help you clean up the yard. Or I've heard of people who clean their house before the house cleaner gets there. You know, all that stuff. Well, I think that's the way we are with God sometimes. I better clean this act up a little bit because now he'll have something to do with me. The Lord does some of his best work with us when we are at our worst. We might want to think tonight, where might in our life we might need to make a new resolution that I did in the time that I was on that bus or jogging to face something difficult or painful, that we are needing to be liberated because we need to name the pain or the difficulty. And then the other part of it is when we try to escape the pain, then we certainly are not likely to recognize somebody else's or pay attention to the pain of other people or the pain of the bigger world. The truth is, the bigger world has a lot of pain going on in it. We have, as you know, there's wars and violence and hunger and poverty and exploitation and human trafficking and scams and disrespect for the dignity of life and all that stuff. And this hope thing is so important because Christian hope recognizes, you know what, there's trouble out there in the world and we're going to take it on with the power of God and Jesus, with the conviction that something new and different is possible. And the way I look at it, in a troubled world, if we don't bring a sense of hope to it, who's going to? That's what our call is, each of us. And that doesn't mean big and dramatic actions. It's more of a state of heart that does believe in the power of hope. We'll never be instruments of peace or agents of justice. We'll never take on the evils and the pain of the world if we're afraid or too numb to recognize the evil or the pain in the first place. I remember Hurricane Katrina, and I remember at the time there was this phrase that happened, and it says, you know what, people are having compassion fatigue. Well, I thought, you know, those are two words that probably should never be together for a Christian. Compassion, fatigue. Because our compassion is to always be there, but sometimes, I've done it myself, we can numb ourselves to not even sense it anymore because there's so much going on that's tough to see. So, hope is about naming what's happening and facing it with the power of God and Jesus. So you might just want to ask yourself, what might be some obstacles for you in hoping at this time in your life and in the world? Finally, as people who are baptized in the death and resurrection of Jesus, we are called to be pilgrims of hope. On the way, that's what a pilgrim is, on the journey in the world. And as we've seen, hope is often difficulty, challenges, and obstacles to it. So I want to conclude by taking a look at some ideas for building a foundation of hope in our lives and being hopeful, especially when we're called into the wilderness. I call this the formula for hope. And the first part of that is to remember to remember. What do we remember? We remember that God is with us. And how do we remember that God is with us? We remember that God is with us by remembering when God was with us. Because usually when we're in that place of having trouble having hope, we're not thinking God is very close. And so I say remember to remember the times that God was with us in order to bring that to the present time. A way to bring hope in our lives is to reach back to a blessed moment, to a blessed event, to one of those times when we were really sure God was there and felt very close. That's what Jesus did on Mount Tabor with the apostles, the transfiguration that we had at the beginning of Lent. He took those apostles up there and they saw him in his resurrected glory and they thought, oh man, this is very cool. Let's hang out here forever. Let's build some tents. And Jesus said, oh, no. We got to go back down the mountain. But what he did was he gave them that vision of his glory so that when they were facing hard times, they could pull it out of their hearts. And that is what would get them through. And that's what I mean by remembering to remember. I call it the mountaintop moments when we really felt loved by God and inspired by God. The times that we never thought we would make it through it, and we did. The times that we never thought we could do something, and we did. We cared for someone through a terrible illness, or we made it through grief, or we made it through a horrific experience in our lives. A time when we solved a seemingly unsolvable problem, or forgave and thought that we couldn't be forgiven, or were forgiven and we never thought we would be. We are called in our lives to remember to remember. And when you think about it, this is what our faith is all about. Think about the fact that Eucharist is about remembering. And I put it this way. The way I put it is that Jesus gathered his apostles. He gathered them on the night before he died because it's time for the Passover. And every good Jew celebrated Passover meals. But I'm sure all those apostles didn't want to go to dinner that night. I mean, maybe they had a football game to watch. I don't think they watched football, but everybody doesn't always want to go to church, right? Okay, but they were all there. And that night, Jesus looks around the table and he says, he blesses the bread, part of the ceremony. And he blesses the bread. Okay, fine, but then he says, this bread is my body. What? That bread's not your body, that bread is bread. And then he picks up the chalice, part of the ritual of the Passover, full of wine. And he said, this wine is my blood. What? Now he's really lost it. I mean, imagine. Or maybe he's been tipping a little bit too much himself. I mean, you don't know, okay? That bread is not your body, that wine's not your blood. And then he says, this bread is my body, this wine is my blood, which will be given up for you. And it's like his heavenly Father, God, looked down from heaven. And he said, he's doing it. My son is doing what I wanted him to do. And so it's like he said, by God, that bread is his body and that wine is his blood. Because he is saying that the lives of my people are worth his life. He said to those apostles, and the beautiful thing about our Catholic faith is that he says it to each one of us every single time we celebrate Mass. This bread is my body, this wine is my blood. Your lives are worth my life. And he says, do this in memory of me. And memory is not about a trip down memory lane in a nostalgic way. Memory in the biblical sense is making present again what I just did. And that's the great gift of Eucharist every time we celebrate Mass. So if you're in the wilderness now or next time you are, remember to remember the times God has been with you in the past and how you made it and how that memory will now nourish your hope for the future. And the final part of the formula for hope is looking for and acknowledging hope all around you. If you remember, first of all, the times that you have made it through something and you never thought you could, you can be an inspiration to yourself. I remember back making it through my mom's death and my dad's death and an older brother's death and a younger brother's death and my 29-year-old nephew dying suddenly and all kinds of stuff. And I made it. I want to tell you tonight, take with you this. Let you inspire you. Let you inspire you. Remember the times that you made it through. That will help you to hope. And then we look around at other people who are signs of hope for us. Who are those people in our lives? The people that have gone through terrible stuff and hard stuff, and they're living their lives with tremendous courage and motivation. Remember that we remember in the church and we read scriptures and all the rest of it, because remembering when God was with us helps us to remember that God is with us. And as we remember the people in our lives who have been hope for us, let's call them to mind. This brings me to thinking about people who have been hope for me. I remember a young man named Peter. Actually, he lived out this way. He came to Mass at Christ Cathedral. He does from time to time. He always says hi to me. And not long ago, Peter's about late 20s, early 30s in the police department. He says, Father, last week I was shot. It injured him, but he's still there. I said, Peter, how do you get out there? How do you go out there every single day like you do? He said, Father, because I trust that God is with me. That guy's a sign of hope for me at his young age, hoping and having the courage to get out there as a police officer. I remember not my sister-in-law, but my brother-in-law's sister-in-law. Her name's Linda. And a while back, I went to see Linda. She was in her last days of life. And I remember sitting down with Linda, and we were talking, and then she said to me, she said, Christopher, and Linda was never Catholic, but she brought her kids to church. She went to church, and she said to me, she says, why haven't you ever tried to recruit me? And I said, recruit you? She said, yeah, why haven't you ever asked me if I'd like to become a Catholic? Well, I said, Linda, you know, I believe in the no pressure approach. Well, she said, could it still happen? Could I become Catholic? And I said, you mean could I still recruit you? And she said, yes. And then she said, could you recruit me this very afternoon? And I said, yes. Just let me go out to my car and get the church, because I carry what I call the little church in my car, you know, my holy water and prayer books and all that kind of stuff. And then I went out to where she was, to where her husband was and where her daughter was. And I said, you know, Linda wants to be recruited. They said, what? She just told me she wants to be a Catholic, and we're going to do it, so let's go on in. So we brought Linda into the church, and within 24 hours, she died. She stands to me as a sign of hope, because even in those final days and in her pain, with humor and also a great seriousness, she asked to be recruited, and it was really beautiful. I'm thinking about this young altar server at Christ Cathedral. He recently came up to me after serving at Mass, and I don't like going up like this church. I would always have to go. Where is it? I always check it out. Where's the rails? Okay, there's a rail way back there. Do you think I'd go up those steps without a rail? No way, because I'm afraid of tripping. I guess when you break your foot once and can't walk for 3 months, you think about that stuff. But anyway, so this young guy, 14 years old, he said, Father Christopher, next time I serve for you, can I help you up the steps? I said, well, yes, you can. And then he said, Father, it would be an honor. I carry that kid in me, 14 years old, to say such a beautiful thing. There's a sign of hope from a 14-year-old boy. I recently went to Omaha, Nebraska. I went there on New Year's Day because Brother William Woger, who was the liturgical consultant when we were renovating Christ Cathedral, died. And his funeral was January 2nd. So I remember flying there, and I got there about 9 o'clock at night. And I remember saying to the young man at the desk, I said, is there any restaurant open? Because I'm hungry and I have to have dinner. I've been on an airplane. He said, yeah. He said, but my favorite restaurant is closed. I said, well, do you have a second favorite restaurant? So he said, well, yes, I do. I said, okay, can you tell me, is it closed? Yeah, it's closed. He gave me the directions. I went out to the place. The restaurant is closed. Everything's closed. It's New Year's Day, okay? So I came back into the lobby, and the young man is there, and I said, both of the restaurants are closed. And he said, sir, do you have DoorDash? I said, yes, I do have DoorDash. I was very proud that I had DoorDash. I was super complimented that he even thought I did. And I said, I do, but does it work in Omaha? He said, yes, sir, it does, and we let the DoorDash people deliver to the rooms. So I said, okay, well, then I'm going to use DoorDash. And so I said, but how are they going to know? I mean, what do I put in here? This is a hotel, and how are they going to know? Sir, could I take your cell phone? I'll punch it in for you. So he did, and I placed an order, a very healthy order, into Wendy's restaurant. And so he punches it all in there, and can't wait for my Wendy's. And his face fell, sir, Wendy's just closed. Oh no. And then he said this. He said, you know, my grandpa made spaghetti for us today on New Year's Day, and I brought some of that spaghetti to work. He says, if you'd like, I could go warm up that spaghetti and you could have that for your dinner. And I said to him, is that all you have, spaghetti? I didn't mean it the way it sounded. He must have been thinking, who is this guy anyway? I said, what I meant is that the only food you have? Because I didn't want to eat his only dinner that he brought to work. Okay. So anyway, I said, and afraid that I would be, I said, let's try one more time the DoorDash thing, okay? So we ordered, he helped me place an order somewhere else. And while we were placing the order, that kid said, well, he was a young adult, but he said to me, but sir, you know what? You'd really like my grandpa's spaghetti. I carried that moment with me the rest of the days that I was there. I knew no one. I was sad because brother had died. But that young man was a sign of hope for me that day. And that's what I mean. But we got to look for these signs of hope around us. Keep our eyes open. Don't just let the moments pass us by. I think that's what I'm getting at tonight. And I'm sure you all have your stories too. And you know what's fun is when we notice the goodness out there, then it starts making life feel real good. Because we see that there is a lot of goodness out there, even in the midst of the tough stuff. So I invite all of us to look out there for those signs of hope. Our baptism into the death and resurrection of Jesus and the victory of his resurrection calls us to live with hope. As I said at the funeral of my younger brother who died, I remember during the homily, I said, you know what, everybody? Life wins. Life wins. Well, my remaining siblings and relatives picked up on that, and now to this day, when there's something tough or challenging going on and text messages start flying, a message that usually always goes with it from somebody is, life wins. We have the power to fashion our lives and to fashion the kind of world that God desires. And we do that with the motivation and the foundation of hope. All of us can be those pilgrims of hope in our world. We can get out of the fear and cynicism that goes on, and we can be people of hope. As I've said, by naming our pain, being willing to go through it, remembering to remember that God is with us by remembering when God was with us, remembering the times that we've made it through something difficult and be our own inspiration of hope, and by looking for signs of hope in the faith and goodness and generosity of those we know or know about. Today, I began by sharing my story about Nelson, the 17-year-old that was shot across from the rectory, and how his little brother Louis, 9 at the time, rode his bicycle by and saw his brother. And years later, not long before I left the parish, I remember after Mass, this young man now in his early 20s came up to me and he said, "Father," he said, "I'm Louis Pineda." Louis was Nelson's brother. I hadn't seen him for a long time because the family eventually moved out of the neighborhood, but Louis came back because he wanted to say, he said, "Father, I want you to know that I'm getting married, and I would be honored if you officiated at my marriage, at my wedding." And I remember what a sign of hope Louis was for me, because he could have dumped it all. He could have turned from God. He could have become cynical and angry for the rest of his life over what happened to his brother and what he witnessed, but he didn't. That's a sign of hope. And then not long ago, a couple months ago, Louis and his sibling Lizzie, they were little at the time, they called and they said their dad, his name was Nelson too, had died. Could I come to the funeral? And I said that I could. And so I came to the funeral and I ended up doing the graveside service. And when I finished the graveside service, another young man came up to me and he said, "Father Christopher," he says, "when my parents moved and we moved out here to this area," he said, "they had another baby and I'm that baby, now a young adult." And he says, "My name is Christopher. They named me after you." And I share that because you just never know. You never know. And that is a sign of hope for me. Not because I did anything particularly great, but because I knew that somehow these folks had been touched and they were continuing to bring life and hope to the world. Talk about stories of hope. That's a strong one, and there are so many others. And I'd like to end tonight, and if I can do it, first of all, if my voice will make it and my sight will help me, I want to sing a little something for you. And I want you to imagine that you are on the hill of Calvary, and that you're on the hill of Calvary not then but now, but it's the Calvary where Jesus died, and now it's after the resurrection. And so many people have been on that hill believing in the resurrection. And as we prepare to celebrate again the death and resurrection of Jesus, maybe this is you, maybe this is me. He who healed our sorrows, he was bruised and broken. He whose love no end knows, here was forsaken, left all alone. Here despair cries boldly, claiming this its victory. Sweeter peace enfolds me. Hope did not die here, but here was given. Here is hope. He who was rejected and knows well my longing, he so long expected, carried our burdens, bore every sorrow. Here is hope. Here is love unbounded. Here is all compassion. Here is mercy founded. Hope did not die here, before was given, and ours is the victory. Here is hope. Here is hope. Everyone, here is hope. Again, here is hope. You are signs of hope for me. It is blessed to be with you. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Father. That was very inspirational. Definitely made me think. I tend to be, I don't know. I tend to be more on the cynical side of things. It's just I don't know. My job, engineering, everything's technical. And in fact, we have a saying at work that hope is not a strategy, just because we have to be in complete control of everything. And right, but you've definitely, I'm going to actually say in my next briefing that I hope this is going to work out, just to foster hope. But anyhow, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. Okay, so at this time, we have two things happening right now. So we will be doing our usual love offering collection to help support the Ignite ministry and other ministries here in the church. And then Father has also provided some handouts for you to take home. So those will be coming around as well. And we should have enough, just to be safe, if we could only take one handout per family, that would be great. And then if we have any extra afterwards, we'll have them in the back if you want to take any extras. So one handout per family. And then we will also go ahead and start the Q&A session. So I think Andy's got the microphone over there. Yep. So anybody has a question for Father, raise your hand. JC.
Thank you very much, Father Christopher. I used to go to the Crystal Cathedral when the Schuler family ran it, and I was just intrigued by the campus. And then when the events transpired where there was infighting in the family and they were going to lose control, and it finally came to the Catholic Church, I was reading all these events in the paper, and they weren't weekly, but every so often. And the final installment, Robert Schuler himself said, well, if it has to go to anyone else, I'm glad it's going to Holy Mother Church. Could you comment about that? I thought that was just beautiful.
Yes, I will comment on it. And I will say before that, though, there are 3 pages that you have there, kind of like a summary. And I had like three parts of my talk. What is hope anyway? What are the obstacles, and what's the formula? And then there's little reflection questions that you might find helpful for the rest of Lent. Actually, what happened was after the Crystal Cathedral campus, we did not occupy it yet, but I was the vicar for priests at the time, and then I was rector. And we invited Robert Schuller to come, Dr. Robert Schuller, the original, to come and talk to the priests. And so he came, and I always remember this. There's this thing called the Freed Theater. Dr. Schuller did not want to walk up the steps to the stage. He wanted to already be on the stage. And there was this big old screen, like a movie screen, but he wanted to sit behind it. He's kind of into drama. And then have the screen go up, and then he'd introduce himself. He reminded me of, did you ever remember Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln at the Disneyland? You know, Abe Lincoln gets kind of like that. With all due respect, doctor, I knew him, I got to know him. Anyway, but he stood up and he said, "It is my privilege finally to address the Mother Church." Oh my goodness, everybody was, it was quite a dramatic moment. And he did say that his life's work, which was culminated in the Crystal Cathedral, he is confident that with the Roman Catholic Church, it will remain a place for Christ. And that's a little expansion on what the story was. In fact, he said to me personally, he said, "I always wanted the cathedral to be a place for Christ." And he said, "I know that with the Roman Catholic Church, it will be a place for Christ forever." So I told that story, and that became kind of like our motto of Christ Cathedral, a place for Christ forever. Yeah. So that's the little story there.
Any other questions?
Questions, comments, clarifications?
Oh, it looks like you're going to get off light.
Yes.
How could you get someone that you know is out in the field?
Out of what?
That, like what you call out in the
The
wilderness? How do you get someone that is in there but denies it? How would you approach that person to open his eyes to know that he is in the wilderness?
Well, you can't force somebody into that, and that's a really good question, because that's exactly the point, that many of us, if not most of us, tend at some point in our life to not acknowledge that we're in it because it's too scary to acknowledge it. And you know, kind of the weird thing is, sometimes we start getting used to it. And so sometimes not wanting to get out of it is because at least it's miserable, but at least I know what this misery is. I don't know what life might be like if it's any different. That's what keeps us from getting help sometimes when we actually need it. And I think that you can't force someone into that, but I think one thing that can be done, and I don't think it helps to say, well, you're just denying it. I think that sometimes people are inspired by our example. So sharing sometimes the times maybe that you've been in the wilderness with the person could be maybe not immediately, but and you made it, and you're the example. So just as I said, let you inspire other people too. And sometimes that's by sharing that you've been in the wilderness before. And let that stand as itself, and you just never know when the moment might come for the person to eventually acknowledge that he or she is in the wilderness. That's what I'd recommend. But I wouldn't try to talk them out of it. That usually doesn't work. Because when we're in, as they say, denial or not acknowledging it, we hang on pretty steadfast to that, pretty much. And sometimes dig our heels in deeper when somebody tries to talk us out of it. So the best way, I think, is to be the example of naming your own. Yeah, good question.
do you have any ways that we can teach our young people to have more hope for the future?
Yes, your life. That's kind of a main thing I want to communicate tonight. Is the best teacher is the example of our own lives. Again, because hope is not, in my experience, not usually something that you can talk somebody into, but it's something that you can be an example of in your own life. And I'll just say some practical things about that, is that I would just give some cautions. And the cautions are: watch your language. Watch your language. Watch your complaining. Watch how you talk about other people. Watch how you name events and circumstances in the world, because young people listen to older people, and if what they hear mostly is negativity, that's going to not be helpful for them developing a hopeful spirit. So I always say, when it comes to that, I say it a lot. I preach this way sometimes too. In families, watch how we're talking. Watch the tone of what we say, because how we present ourselves gives away kind of what's going on inside. So that's the best I could do in terms of the young people. And I'll tell you this, that's what I try to do in my own family. I have nieces and nephews. I don't know what you consider young people, but I'm certainly one. But I'm thinking about my nieces and nephews who at this point are like in their 30s, late 20s, and beyond. And then I got even great nieces and nephews now too. But, and I know they especially watch me, So, but I liked that, remember that thing I said about life wins, My young relatives picked up on that, because they liked hearing something positive like that. And that's what I mean by language. So whenever I'm in, with my family, and especially, and the young ones are around and everything, I really, really try to watch how I'm speaking and what the tone of what I'm saying is like. Because it's super easy, in my opinion, these days, to kind of get caught in what I call that spiral of negativity. Kind of like watching water go down a drain. And that's how conversations happen sometimes. And we have something to do about the quality of our conversations. That is something we can do something about.
Anyone else?
Hi, Father. So I've always had the motto, hope for the best, expect the worst. And what I've realized is that now it's pretty much expect the worst, plan for the worst, and hoping for the best has kind of taken a back seat. So what would you recommend to kind of bring that hoping for the best forward and kind of having the hope that the worst is not going to happen?
I don't know that hope and the worst go together. I think what I would suggest about that, and I asked the question in the talk, might be helpful to see what you really believe is possible. Because if you don't believe things are possible, you're going to pretty much there's not going to be any reason to have an attitude that's going to be hopeful. So I think it's good to think about what you really believe is, what you really think is possible in this world, and make a list of it. And if you're having trouble with that, then ask God to help you, and maybe ask somebody else to help you too. And I think the perspective of Christian hope, I think the statement to that's kind of I find that's kind of like shielding ourselves or yourself or myself from disappointment if you expect the worst. If I expect the worst, then I'm not going to ever get disappointed. It's kind of like, and these are just, it's kind of like a baseball player will never hit a home run if he never goes to bat. Ice skater will never make a beautiful turn if he or she doesn't go out on the ice in the first place with the risk of falling. So that's the kind of thing that it's a risky business too. To be the player that's going, I could strike out or I could hit a home run, but I won't know unless I get out there anyway. So those are the first things that come to mind.
Do you have another song for us, Father?
I did not write that song. A guy by the name of Rob Gardner wrote it, and it's part of a whole gorgeous, I don't know what it's called. It's not an opera. It's not a music. It's a work, a sacred work that kind of starts before the Lord's Passion and all, and it's got beautiful music in it. And it might even be called Here is Hope, if you want to look it up. It's got gorgeous music. The scriptures that are used the King James version of the Bible. So it's the version with the these and thous, but they don't say a lot of it, but we get kind of distracted sometimes by that. But the lyrics of the songs and the music itself. And I went online and got the music to it. And I play the piano and all that, so I can read music, and that's why I said, that's why I wanted the lights to be, oh no. So, Here is Hope. Here is Hope. And you could just look that up. And I can guarantee you, the version that's on the recording is way better than what I did, so. But the words are exactly the same.
You know, Father, years ago, here at St. Paul, I asked the pastor where he needed help, and his help was bereavement. And this is 20 years ago. And I thought, no, I don't want to do bereavement. I want to do something fun. I don't want to do bereavement. But it wasn't long after he asked me that, and doing bereavement and doing rosary vigils and doing graveside services, that I found a love and a compassion for that ministry. And I believed it to be the greatest ministry that you can do. And it wasn't until through prayer and thinking about it that if we truly call ourselves Christians, that death is not the end. And if you really, really believe that, it really helped me throughout my life. I lost my daughter at 37. And I didn't turn my back on God. I embraced him, and I thanked him for taking my daughter home, because I truly believe that she went home. And it is only through death. Death is inevitable for all of us. And it helped me to have a better understanding of my own life, and the fact that things can go on in life, everyday life, but in the end, they're not the worst. It's not the worst thing that could happen. And even in death, it's not the worst thing that can happen if you have your faith and you have your belief. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and it can sometimes feel like the worst thing. and to move through that and that's why I want to just emphasize again that, and you know this anyway, but hope is sometimes quite difficult, because we can't see what we're hoping for, you know. And the good thing is we always have our faith. And I wanted to say about bereavement ministry, something I've thought of, that ministry with grieving people and all the rest. You've probably run into a lot of people who really are facing this with courage and faith and all the rest of it. I've said sometimes before that I think priests should be among some of the most hopeful people in the world. Why? Because we're invited into the lives of people at some of their worst times. And we see people's grieving, people losing their marriages, their jobs, their family problems, all kinds of stuff. We're called into people's lives sometimes at the worst. And over again, I've seen people go through what they're going through, wanting to make it through and go through it with faith and with courage and a lot of inspiration out there. And that's, for me, that's been one of the gifts of my priesthood it's not pleasant to see the suffering of people, and it's inspiring to see how people make their way through it. And those people are you, those people are me, and the power of hope is very strong.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Okay, we're pretty much at the end of the evening. Before we do our final closing and closing prayer, I did want to just put a few reminders out. And let's see, this coming Friday, April 11th, right here at St. Paul, various ministries have gotten together and will be presenting In His Steps, which is a presentation of the Stations of the Cross. So the afternoon will start at 4:30. From 4:30 to 6:30, there'll be a Lenten meal in Maher Hall that's put on by the Women's Fellowship Ministry. And then starting at 6:45 will be the Stations of the Cross with prayer and testimony and song here in the church. And that will be led by St. Paul clergy, the lector, youth, young adult, and music ministries. So that sounds like a great afternoon. This coming Saturday, the 12th, the 40 Days of Life, 40 Days for Life. There'll be a closing rally at the Planned Parenthood in Pomona. I was going to refer everybody to Bill and Claudia Shannon for more details on that, but unfortunately they're not here. I think there's a poster out in the back. And then just a final reminder for those that were here last week, this will be a reminder, but for those that weren't, maybe new, we will be doing the total consecration to Jesus through Mary with Father Ed Broom, and that will take place pretty much during the whole month of June on Wednesday evenings, starting June 4th, and then the final consecration mass on July 2nd. So that's being presented by the Walking with Moms in Need ministry and our own Ignite ministry. So just a few reminders of some upcoming events, and obviously we have Holy Week next week, so a lot to look forward to. Father, thank you again. Thank you for coming out here and simmering with us. It was a very good talk. And with that, if you wouldn't mind giving us a closing prayer and a blessing, that would be wonderful.
Loving and gracious God, we thank you for gathering us together tonight, and we ask you to fill our hearts with hope, especially as we come upon the solemn days that we celebrate the reason for Christian hope, and that is the death and the resurrection of your Son, Jesus Christ. Tonight, we reflected for a moment on how you looked upon your Son on the night of the Last Supper, and how that night when Eucharist was born, that we Catholics have that same exact experience every time we celebrate Eucharist. Jesus saying, "This is my body, this is my blood, your lives are worth my life." Heavenly Father, help us to celebrate that moment well. And it is really our privilege to come before you now as our Father, saying together, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." Amen. And may the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit come upon you tonight and stay with you forever. Amen. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Father.